So this is the masthead of William Lloyd Garrison's original abolitionist newspaper, but it's colorized because it's the Liberator dot today. Okay, I know we have a cat over here, and we have a dog right behind me, and I know that's a recipe for disaster in making a recording. Nonetheless, I'll trust you to pay attention. This week, we hear the conclusion of the second dream that Chief Plenty Coups of the Crow Nation had when he was but a boy, age 10. In Plenty Coups' second dream, there is nothing metaphoric about the countless herds of bison which disappear from the plains. Additionally, there is nothing metaphoric about the domesticated cattle which Plenty Coups is shown will replace the bison. But in the conclusion of the dream, Plenty Coups will be shown images and metaphors, trees and storms and a small tiny bird. Nonetheless, this second half of the dream will offer up the most practical wisdom for Plenty Coups. The chiefs of the Crow Nation decide to follow the advice of the dream. So should we, as we consider how the story of Plenty Coups is a blueprint for radical hope. My name is Lowell Bliss. Welcome to episode 40 of the Liberator Today's video series on hope. At this point in the second dream, the man-person leads Plenty Coups away from the scene of the buffalo and the cattle and shows him a scene which Plenty Coups tells his biographer is the very land on which he and his biographer are sitting at the time of their interview, 70 years later. Plenty Coups also sees a very old man sitting in the shade alone. Quote, I felt pity for him because he was so old and feeble. This old man is yourself, Plenty Coups, the man-person reveals. I interpret this moment in two ways. First, the dream created a moment where Plenty Coups could show compassion, or pity as he says, on himself. It seems to me that this is an operation of hope. We need to treat ourselves kindly and speak words of comfort to our souls. The second thing that this glimpse of himself as an old man accomplishes is that it reassures Plenty Coups that he will indeed have a future. The old way of life may collapse, but it is not the future which collapses. Last week I alluded briefly to John 21, where on the brink of an uncertain future, Jesus tells Peter and the disciples to not be afraid, but to follow him. He also prophesies over Peter that the commission of feeding his sheep will be attendant with suffering and imprisonment. It won't be an easy future, but Peter is at least given the reassurance he has a future. And that is no small thing. The man-person and the old man disappear and the rest of the dream unfolds. Quote, I saw only a dark forest. A fierce storm was coming fast. The sky was black with streaks of mad color through it. I saw the four winds gathering to strike the forest and held my breath, Plenty Coups says. Pity was hot in my heart for the beautiful trees. I felt pity for all things that lived in that forest, but was powerless to stand with them against the four winds that together were making war. I shielded my own face with my arm when they charged. I heard the thunders calling out in the storm, saw beautiful trees twist like blades of grass and fall in tangled piles where the forest had been. Bending low, I heard the four winds rush past me as though they were not yet satisfied. And then I looked at the destruction they had left behind them. Only one tree, tall and straight, was left standing where the great forest had stood. The four winds had always made war alone, and this time had struck together, riding down every tree in the forest but one. Standing there alone among its dead tribesmen, I thought it looked sad. What does this mean? I whispered in my dream. Listen, Plenty Coups, said a voice. In that tree is the lodge of the Chickadee. He is the least in strength, but strongest of mind among his kind. He is willing to work for wisdom. The Chickadee-person is a good listener. Nothing escapes his ears, which he has sharpened by constant use. Whenever others are talking together of their successes or failures, there you will find the Chickadee-person listening to their words. But in all his listening, he tends to his own business. He never intrudes, never speaks in strange company, and yet never misses a chance to learn from others. He gains success and avoids failure by learning how others succeeded or failed, without great trouble to himself. There is scarcely a lodge he does not visit, hardly a person he does not know, and yet everybody likes him because he minds his own business, or pretends to. The lodges of countless bird people were in that forest when the four winds charged it. Only one is left unharmed, the lodge of the Chickadee-person. Develop your body, but do not neglect your mind, Plenty Coups. It is the mind that leads a man to power, not strength of body. Unquote. Thus ends the last great dream of Plenty Coups when he was a boy, with a small bird that is willing to work for wisdom, a small bird who is a good listener, who minds his own business. When the four winds strike together, as they do at times of great devastation, one tree is left standing, the one which houses the lodge of the Chickadee-person. Days later, in the village lodge, Yellow Bear, whom Plenty Coups calls the wisest of all the gathered chiefs, interprets the dream. Quote, "The dream of Plenty Coups means that the white men will take and hold this country, and that their spotted buffalo will cover the plains. Plenty Coups was told to think for himself, to listen, to learn to avoid disaster by the experience of others. He was advised to develop his body, but not to forget his mind. The meaning of his dream is plain to me. I see its warning. The tribes who have fought the white men have all been beaten, wiped out. By listening as the chickadee listens, we may escape this and keep our lands." Unquote. And keep their lands they ostensibly did, as I will explain in later weeks, unlike almost every other indigenous nation that met up with the four winds, which was the coming of the white man. We'll talk about this next week, what practical decisions were made out of Yellow Bear's explicit interpretation, or his blueprint of hope, as we've been saying. "Ho," said Plenty Coups to his biographer Frank Linderman when he was done recounting his dream. He makes the sign for finished. Quote, "And here I am," Plenty Coups says, "an old man sitting under this tree just where that old man sat 70 years ago when this was a different world." Unquote. There were two old companions who sat with Plenty Coups and Linderman during the interview. The one named Coyote Run speaks up, quote, "We traveled by that dream. The men who sat in that lodge when Plenty Coups told what he had seen and heard knew a heap better than he did that it was time the crows turned their faces another way." Unquote. It looks like we'll give more weeks after this one to Plenty Coups, and I admit to feeling some impatience about it. This is episode 40 of a video series that I told myself would be limited to 52, a year's worth of study on hope. I still have Aquinas and Jacques Ellul to get to, and I find myself wanting to rush on through Plenty Coups' story. There's also some impatient anxiety in my life at the moment. My wife and I are in the process of exiting the mission agency that has given us identity and security for 25 years. The future platform for my ministry, as well as the source of my paycheck, is uncertain. Two different boards are meeting on the 16th of this month to discuss my future. When I wrote this episode, it was only the 4th. I've got to wait. But I'm convicted today by this very script. My own spiritual director on Tuesday advised me, "Lowell, befriend this transition period. Ask, what's the gift here?" He could have just as easily have said, "Lowell, slow down. Be the Chickadee-person." I'm Lowell Bliss, Christian environmental missionary and climate activist. Thank you for visiting the Liberator today.